welcome to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debating show. This week, broadcast from the European Parliament here in Brussels. I'm your host, Maret Gwyn. Now, every week, two members of the European Parliament step into the ring to debate some of the most pressing issues facing the European Union. This week, we're discussing the economic downturn looming over European nations. A deep ideological divide is now emerging between countries who want more joint borrowing to fund growth and frugal states who want fiscal discipline. Luis Albertos explains.
Is Europe's economy at breaking point? High borrowing costs, limited fiscal space and weakening competitiveness are all putting Europe's economic stability at risk. Countries previously considered economic powerhouses such as France and Germany are now struggling with sluggish growth due to low productivity and industrial decline. The diagnosis is clear, but the solution is not. EU capitals are torn on the way forward. Last week, Spain proposed expanding the EU's use of common debt to help finance strategic investments. Under the proposal, the European Commission would borrow on behalf of EU member states to fund shared priorities, such as defense, energy, innovation and infrastructure. Supporters, namely Southern European member states, argue that it would strengthen Europe's competitiveness and lower financing costs. But several northern member states oppose expanding common debt, arguing the EU should prioritize stricter spending rules and fiscal discipline. Can EU countries find common ground? And what would be the economic cost for Europe if they don't?
That's the topic for our debate today. Let's now meet our contenders.
Pasquale Tridico, an Italian MEP from the left from Movimento 5 Stelle. An economist and former president of Italy's National Institute for Social Security, he serves in the European Parliament's Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs and chairs the Subcommittee on Tax Matters. A strong advocate of greater public investment at EU level, he says, competitiveness does not come from deregulation, but from innovation embedded in investment. Common debt, not for the rearm, but for our companies and our citizens. Markus Ferber, a German MEP from the centre-right European People's Party. A long-serving member of the European Parliament, he is the vice chair of the Subcommittee on Tax Matters and a member of the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. A consistent advocate of fiscal discipline and competitiveness, he says, "We tried a one-off debt instrument during the pandemic and are still arguing about who repays it. Now Spain wants to make that the permanent model. It is a supremely bad idea."
So let's welcome both of them, Markus Ferber and Pasquale Tridico. Great to have you with us on The Ring. Now, the idea here is to have an open debate, a healthy one, a frank one, and to give our viewers at home a taste of the debates that happen here in the European Parliament. So let's get started. Markus Ferber, let me come to you first. Spain putting now on the table a proposal, a bold one, 850 billion euros more in joint EU borrowing every year to fund growth. Is this a good idea?
It is a good idea if it comes from the real economy, and that is what we have firstly to discuss. How can you organize growth? And I don't think you can organize growth by putting public money in the economy and wait for growth, and therefore all these attempts to spend money from public budgets and then hoping growth will come never worked. At the end you had high debts and no sustainable growth, therefore it's not the right instrument.
Yes, Europe is competing with global giants, China, the US. Is it inevitable now that it needs to pool sovereignty and that only as a strong bloc it can compete with these giants, Pasquale?
Yes, the point is not to do something extraordinary that countries do not do. It's to complete what we should do. In fact, Europe, the Eurozone in particular, is an imperfect union exactly because it does not use one of the most important tools for economic growth that in the history has been used, meaning the public debt, in particular when when times require that. In crisis time, during, in fact, the COVID, it was used for a short time for a temporary tool. And this was the crisis which was better managed than ever in Europe. Actually, we have introduced the first SURE and then Next Generation EU, which were very useful temporary for Europe to grow. If we don't understand that Europe is lacking one important tool that all countries, they have, in Japan, in UK, in USA, they have. It's not something that is new in the economy.
So Pasquale is saying that there is a precedent, so the SAFE instrument, the 150 billion euros, also the joint loan for Ukraine recently. Why not explore these avenues when it comes to the other crisis facing Europe, which is the competitiveness crisis?
I think we have to separate various things. Ukraine is Ukraine and should be dealt separately, and we should not mix things. The SURE program are loans for the member states. Of course, for some member states it's interesting to get loans from the European Union as they have to pay less public loans, but they have to pay less interest rates, That's the issue, because they don't have AAA. But if you look, for example, the member state I know best, we are not interested in that as we have AAA by ourselves. And even the interest rates are lower for Germany than for the European Union. So it's an instrument for those who suffer already, but to make them alive does not mean to give more debts to them. We should really think how we can strengthen the economies. Look to Greece, which is performing best because they did reforms. Look to Italy, they are performing worse because they never did reforms. Look to Spain, they misused the money of Next Generation EU, not for investments but for social welfare. Sorry, if that is the way it is dealt in Europe, it's not a good idea.
So that's the debate around the Spanish pensions. And there is a debate now around whether the EU can repay the COVID recovery and resilience loans. Some leaders calling for the repayment to be delayed. So if it's so difficult for the EU to repay its current debt, wouldn't it be irresponsible to borrow more right now?
No, because Europe does not have any debt. Again, I insist. We need to complete the union. It's not something that we are adding. And this is not only, as it was mentioned by Ferber, a matter of North against South. It's a matter of union.
That is not what I said, my friend.
I just underline the point. We are in the Eurozone, in the European Union, and we do have a common tariff. We do have export and import. And all countries benefit from the fact, for instance, the North, Germany, benefit from the fact that it can export towards the South. So now, an asymmetrical crisis in the South is caused as well because Germany exports more towards the South. So if you don't build the safeguard, the union itself can be destroyed, and Germany cannot even export any longer. The point is that we do have a monetary union without the tool that usually country, economy, robust economy, they have to complete the union. Now, when we introduced it, look how we managed the financial crisis. The financial crisis created poverty, unemployment, destruction of firms in Germany as well as in Italy, in the north and in the south. We didn't do the right things. Only partially at the end of the crisis, in 2012, when Draghi did whatever it takes and didn't even do monetary policy expansion, just say that he should do, the market was in a way calm. Now, we don't have the tool. And I have to say that the first time, Markus, that this policy, the common debt, was proposed in Europe was actually by a center-right government, Berlusconi, by Tremonti. The first ever Minister of Economy which proposed what Spain today is proposing was 15 years ago by a center-right economist.
Your reaction to that, Markus Ferber, quite a lot there.
I think it's not a question of party affiliation. It's a question how to deal with those we want to borrow the money from. And the financial crisis started not because something went wrong in the government, because those who borrowed the countries, in this case Greece, said, we do not borrow any cent anymore to your country because we don't trust that you are able to repay. And what is the signal we are sending out with Next Generation EU? If we discuss with the Council, who promised new own resources for repayment, nothing has happened since that. So the market will not trust us. And then I wish you all the best and good luck to go to the market asking for money, but refinancing, repayment, who cares? Sorry, the market will ask for high interest rates for that, and then it's not a qualified instrument. You have to do some things, a lot of things before. and then maybe one can think. But at the moment, as we are constructed, it makes no sense.
So you disagree with the Spanish economy minister who
Yes,
says that in fact
fully.
by borrowing a lot of money, 850 billion, actually the interest rates will be very favorable. He speaks about 5 billion euros per year in interest.
Yeah, but the idea of the Spanish is that those who want to join in are borrowing money, but the others have to stand for the debts. And that is not functioning. Those who borrow the money have to stay for the debts, but if it is only those who cannot afford the interest rates anymore, they will not have lower interest rates. So I think that is a calculation which fits on the paper, but not on the markets.
Finally, there's clearly a divide here. We're seeing it very clearly. Does that mean that the European Union might not need to move differently, and a group of countries that do favour this might need to do it alone without the backing of the 27?
Well, you need to consider that we do have a Eurozone. Within the Eurozone, this is something that needs to be done. You can have a different approach outside of the Eurozone, but within the Eurozone, this is a common policy. Again, just because it's missing, not because we want to add something more. Let me specify one thing. Everybody probably thinks that Italy, for instance, is a country which spends more than what it gets. Actually, this is the opposite. As all the economists know, the primary surplus of Italy has been in primary surplus for the past 25 years. As Germany, Italy is a country which has more export than import, has always had a primary surplus. It pays a higher cost of debt, which actually is detrimental for the economy because we are paying more interest than other. And in a Eurozone, this is actually dysfunctional. It's not me that is saying that. Nobel economists like Mandel, 1992, say that the first thing that Europe needs to do is to create a safe asset. It works well during the crisis, and then you can cope with the calm market in a better way.
Okay.
Look what's happening today in Germany, but as well in Italy, with the industrial crisis, with the automotive sector, which is leaving thousands of people without jobs. How can we cope with that without a plan like we proposed, the sure plan for automotive, supporting the supply, supporting the demand, and supporting as well the investment in the electric transition? Chinese, with a soft budget constraint, are doing that and are much more competitive.
And I'm sure we will come back to that and the China issue, but I must stop you there because that's the end of our first round. The debate is heating up, I see. We will continue it, but it is time for us to move on, and in the next round we take the gloves off. In this round, we give you both the opportunity to directly challenge each other. I know you've come with your own questions. So now first, Markus Ferber, your first question to Pasquale Tridico.
Yeah, Pasquale, the Spanish paper says that the European Union budget has to guarantee the bonds which are issued, which means we have to increase the guarantees the member states are granting to the European Union. Do you really think it is appropriate then to spend it for debts in other member states and not to spend it directly in the budget? I don't understand this mechanism.
Markus, you don't understand because you don't see the union as a union, probably. If you see the union, Spain as part of the union, then a solidarity mechanism in the Eurozone, not because we want to be good, but because we want an economy which works. We need to accept a common debt. It is not a matter only of solidarity. It's a matter of a well-built framework and economy. Again, this is not what we are saying for political preference. This is what we say after several economists. I quoted before Mandel, and I quoted Stiglitz. Actually, they say that the euro is in crisis exactly because it does not have a safe asset, which works during the crisis time. And we saw that it works because safe assets like during COVID, SURE, Next Generation EU, were exactly done because we missed one structural tool like that, and we introduced temporary. Now, the proposal is to introduce not temporary, but structural in order to act when crises come. Even if you don't have to act, probably the market will be more calm if there is the presence of a safe asset.
Okay, and Pasquale Tridico, your first question now to Markus Ferber.
Markus, we are speaking all the time about resources. Your question as well was about the resource and about how to repay. Now we know that for most of the firms which are doing well and better in the economy are the digital firms which are producing, multinational in particular, which are producing digital service in Europe, and we are not taxing them. We have proposed the web tax in order to collect some common resources, again, to shape our economy as well during crisis time, and for a matter of equilibrium. Would you agree with a web tax?
The problem is a little bit more difficult, as we have some member states in the European Union who have already introduced a so-called digital tax. Yeah, and if I ask the finance ministers of these member states, they say, yes, we are in favor of a digital tax, even European harmonized and how to calculate it, but I want the money. And now that is not a helpful tool to address the issue we are discussing today, because if you want to have that tax as a guarantee for common debts, then these member states who have already introduced a digital tax have to transfer the amounts they are receiving out of that to the European Union. And that's why in the Council no one took it up. So good luck with an idea where there's no support in the Council.
But if I may, for the own resources, there is a debate about gambling sites, for example. What makes digital corporations different?
Yeah, as I said, we have more than a handful of member states who have already a digital tax for national budgets. And therefore they are not willing to give it up. To invent new taxes is always a beloved thing by those who are not able to do reforms. But honestly, if you want to have sustainable growth, you don't have to have higher taxes, you don't have to have more taxes, you really need incentives for the member states, and I'm really surprised that those who overrun the European Union with bureaucratic burdens in the last 10 years, and sorry, you belong to this part of the parliament, are now complaining that we don't create growth anymore. We have to free our economy. That's more important than to throw money to them.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I know you had more questions, but that's all we have time for this second round, because now it's time to bring in a new voice. I'd like to now bring in the President of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde. She sat down for an interview with Euronews last week and was asked for her reaction to Spain's proposal for more joint debt in the EU. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
The circumstances have changed, and it should lead the leaders of the various member states to consider and to address what are their concerns. So I think an ex ante, no over my dead body, is not the best way to deal with it. I think the best way to deal with it is to try to analyze what is too much of a risk and how that risk can be addressed.
So, Markus Ferber, a veiled criticism there of those, like you, I believe, who say no outright. Should we at least debate this more seriously in the EU?
Yeah, but the question is, what is the starting point of the discussion? Is the starting point of the discussion common debts, or is it common policies? Because I read the Spanish proposal that national obligations should be financed by European debts, and that will not work. So we have to take it the other way around. What can we do together as Europeans? And that's why I really don't want to be accused not being a federalist in the positive sense, because I am. But firstly, we have to define what we can do together, and then we have to speak about the financing, and not the other way around. Let's find finances and finance national obligations.
I want to ask you, because Italy is one of the EU countries facing major elections next year, along with France, Spain, Greece and others. Do you fear that we could see a shift back to this kind of narrative that economic matters is a national thing, it's all about national sovereignty, and that could really undermine this push to pool more sovereignty at the EU level?
Look, while we think that economy is a national matter, we are overwhelmed outside by multinationals which are not national. So sovereignty of national economy is very much constrained by global, in particular by multinational. That's why I said before that if we need to define policy, tax policy should be defined as well in the digital sector. I'm not saying that resources should not be left to the member state. Should be coordinated at member state. Even the harmonization, we often do a dumping among member states in terms of tax to attract capital from one country to another. Usually, northern countries try to attract capital with fiscal dumping, with tax dumping. That's why we need a policy in terms of digital services, policy in terms of capital taxes, corporate taxes, harmonization. This is the way to support a federalist idea of Europe.
Okay, thank you both, but it's now time for us to take a break here on The Ring, but we'll be back with more after this, so stay with us. Welcome back to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debate show. I'm Marit Gwyn, and I'm joined this week by Markus Ferber from the European People's Party and Pasquale Tridico from the Left Group. Today, our topic is the state of Europe's economy and the mounting calls on the EU to raise more joint debt to fund growth. Behind these calls, of course, is the realization that European growth is stagnating and that Europe is failing to keep up with major global competitors. Let's take a closer look at the data. And we can see here that in terms of real GDP, that's inflation-adjusted gross domestic product, it's growing at a much higher rate globally than in the EU, but it's also higher in other advanced economies such as Japan and the US. We also see stagnation in real GDP in the EU in recent years, and we know, of course, that in the first quarter of 2026, the Eurozone economy, in fact, shrank by 0.2%. Now, this is concerning for Europeans, and part of the problem is this question of global competitiveness. We know that China, some would say, is increasingly predatory in its tactics when it comes to trade. Is the EU doing enough to get tougher on China?
No, we are not doing enough because we are not using the only asset we have, which is the single market. And if you look to the figures calculated by the International Monetary Fund, which says that even in the trade of goods, we hurt ourselves like tariffs of 45%, which is 3 times what the US is doing with us, that shows there's a high potential in the single market. And we really should use these possibilities to strengthen our home market, to be less dependent from exports to other regions in the world. And the other thing means as well to protect ourselves, especially against China, who is subsidizing its overproduction. And that is not an entrance key for European Union markets, and we should protect ourselves.
We know all of these arguments. We hear them all the time here in Brussels these days. The Commission now saying that by October there will be a trade deal or it does get tougher. Do you believe that that will happen?
Well, I hope so, because I hope that Europe will be more competitive. However, I have to say, competitiveness does not come out of the blue. Competitiveness, of course, comes from investment, from capital, from market, but there is a big role here that can be played, in particular in face of countries which use several weapons, meaning political weapons, economic weapons, such as soft budget constraint. One of the most important tools which we are missing is the public investment here, in particular during transition as the one that we are living. We are living an ecological transition, environmental transition. We are doing nothing to be more competitive, exactly in the same field of China, which is the electric transition. Our automotive sector, for instance, is losing step, is losing competitiveness, exactly because we miss a big player. Look at the case of Boeing, the Air One, to compete against the Boeing in the United States. We had a consortium, one single player like the Airbus, which was more competitive. And here we had an industrial policy, a European industrial policy in that sector, in the Airbus sector. We can have an industrial policy with a plan of at least 500 billion euro, which supported the transition in 3 ways. First, supporting demand. We know that electric cars are higher than LS, so we can, for instance, introduce a cut in the VAT for consumption of electric car. Second, supply. investors are basically afraid, don't know what they do, there is uncertainty. We need to say that the electric transition is a must, but we need to support that, meaning that we need to have credits for tax credits for firms investing huge tax credit, like the United States did, investing in electric cars. And third and last is to support as well employers, meaning workers. Sorry, workers are suffering during this transition because they are getting in furlough scheme, in suspension of work, in unemployment. There is a need there to support income, because without income there is no demand.
Some interesting ideas there. Industrial decline is clearly a big concern in Germany. Do you agree with some of those ideas?
I think our main objectives or main problems are high energy prices. The energy market, a real full integrated energy market could help a lot. Number two is aging society. That is a huge challenge for us, so we have really to invest more in education, in our own people. That is very important. And number three is, as I said, strengthening the single market. That are the key objectives to achieve, not finance here, finance here, finance here. That is not addressing any problem.
Okay. So a few areas of common ground, perhaps, but also a lot of disagreement here, I see. But let me stop you there, because now it's time for us to move on to our fifth and final round. In our last round, we do something a little different. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'm going to ask you to respond with one answer, either yes or no. Are you ready? So, first question to you, Pasquale Tridico. Should the EU embrace joint debt?
Yes, sure.
No.
Markus, should the EU at least debate Spain's proposal for more joint debt?
No.
Yes, sure.
Should Germany and other frugal states accept higher debt if it boosts European competitiveness?
It will not boost, so no.
Yes, sure.
Should highly indebted countries with high rates of debt and deficit cut spending before they ask for more support from the EU?
No.
Of course.
Should Europe prioritise competitiveness over balanced budgets?
No, both goes hand in hand.
Okay.
But they go together.
Okay.
Oh, we agree.
And finally, I'd like to ask you both, is there anything you've heard from your opponents today that has maybe made you change your mind or change your perspective on this debate?
Well, we have spoken about a very specific issue on which actually there is a clear division. I understand the logic of Markus, but this does not work in a union like us, which is actually imperfect.
Okay.
So we are not adding a tool, we are completing the union.
And what about you, Markus Ferber? Anything that Pasquale Tridico has said has maybe changed your mind?
No, because he's speaking about the last step and forget all those steps before. And I spoke about the first steps to be done, and then we are on the right track.
Okay, so we haven't cracked the problem of the division over the EU's common debt on the ring this week, but we've certainly had a good debate on it. Thank you both. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of this edition of The Ring. Thank you again, Pasquale Tridico and Markus Ferber. Thank you also to you at home for watching. And remember, you can continue the debate by sending us your thoughts, feedback and comments. Our email address is thering@euronews.com. And we'll be back soon with more from The Ring. In the meantime, take care and stay with us here on Euronews.